Rob, and welcome to Axel's Garage. Today we're out here again, continuing on with the Big Dummies K5 Blazer. Do you hear that? Do you hear that noise? Take a listen. What do you think of that noise? It's definitely rotational, something to do with the engine, but it's rotational with the engine. It's got nothing to do with driving the vehicle. As you can tell, you can hear it with the vehicle standing still. But when you move the vehicle, you actually hear it a little louder. So I'm going to move the camera. I'm going to get inside. I'm just going to back up a touch and listen for that sound. I've never experienced this before. Alright, as you heard, when I backed up and stopped, the noise got more constant and louder. A noise like that, really never experienced. I know that on these old trucks, I know when they were even new, when I had one new in 1990, the flywheel had a tendency to either crack or the ring gear separate from the flywheel. A buddy of mine had it happen to him once or twice. I had it happen to me once. Sort of what it sounded like. We're hoping it's not the flywheel. Actually, we know, and you can tell from the title of this video, that it's not the flywheel. But I never experienced a sound like this in this kind of fashion. And we're going to get that starter out, and that's going to be the culprit. And we're going to show you how it's the culprit. And I've never seen a starter fail like this. This thing starts right up. Matter of fact, let me show you. Right, starts up good. Starter's not screaming. And it's normal. So we're gonna get some tools out, move the camera. We got a nice day today. It's like 50 degrees in late January in New York. Perfect sweatshirt. Not cold at all. I actually got the heat off in the garage for the first time in over a month. And we'll get the tools out and we'll get that starter out. All right, pulling a starter out on these is pretty easy, straightforward. Disconnect the battery. That's the first thing. You don't need many tools. I take my go-to 3/8 ratchet with a 3 1/6" extension, a regular 6-point set of sockets. Probably only going to use the 9/16 on that one, and then a little 1/4" ratchet handle and a little 1/4" sockets for those small wires that are on the back of the starter. And that's all you need. First thing I'm going to do is just disconnect the battery. For this one, it's a 9/16. Alright, so under the truck, on the passenger side, alright, we got our starter right here. Got 2 bolts that hold the starter in, they're 9/16. And then in the back of the starter, you got your electrical connections. So the first thing I'm going to do is reach up and disconnect my electrical connections. Alright, well the wires are a tangled mess up there, so I'm going to let the starter down. I'll let it sit right here on the front drive shaft, and then I'll disconnect the electrical. Alright, so I don't know how good you saw it under the car, but here's our starter. It's the starter solenoid. These are where the wires go. So the big stud here for your battery cable, and your 10-gauge wire that comes down from your firewall, and right here for your small wire that comes down from your firewall. They always have a third terminal. I've never come across an application that actually used a third terminal. Everything was always on 1 or 2 there. So that one you don't use. Alright, small block Chevy starters come in 2 configurations. This one's got the bolts offset, or there's bolts that go straight across. When the starter goes in, it goes in up this way, and sometimes there'll be a shim that comes across here. It's an angled shim for this one, or if the bolts were straight across, it would be a straight across shim. If you pull the starter down and the shim falls out, when you put your new starter in, you're going to put that same shim back in to see if it's in the right spot. If there's no shim, like we have, we're going to put the starter in with no shim, and if the starter feels too tight, we'll start a little trial and error with some shims. We'll slide some shims in there and see where it sounds the best. There is a measurement that you could do by kicking the gear out, but it's a little bit of a pain in the ass to do the measurement, especially on your back. Backyard mechanic way is just to put it in and do trial and error. So now, what was that noise? And what was wrong with the starter? Well, if you look right here, there's your gear that shoots out into the flywheel to start the car, and that gear should always be back like it is there. And it's spring loaded, and it's tough to get to push that gear out. Usually if you wanted to push the gear out, you have to get a screwdriver in there and pry it up because it's spring loaded. But you'll see this one failed, and it just is flopping around. And even though the starter worked, what would happen is this gear just kept coming out and smacking into the flywheel. And that was the noise we were hearing, and that's why when we backed up and put our foot on the brake, what did that cause? That caused some motion that way, and it would hit. Boom, and it would hit. Like that. That gear is supposed to be all the way in there. I've never seen a starter fail like this. Either the motor goes, or the solenoid goes, and it doesn't kick that gear out. And that's usually the way the starters go, is the solenoid is actually what goes bad. It's not the starter motor that's bad. Usually you go, you do it, and you hear that click. That's this clicking, but not kicking the gear out. Not enough power to kick that gear out. And that's usually the way they go. This one is a first for me, and I've been doing this for over 30 years now. And I've never seen this. If you have, give me a comment. Let me know. Maybe this is just something that I never came across. But even years of working in a parts store, never had a starter fail like this. So we're going to go over to the to our local mom and pop. We're not going to order one online, and the reason why is because I want a local guy to get it from, so that if it fails again, I can bring it. Well, as luck would have it, by the time we got back from the parts store the other day, the skies opened up and our nice day turned into a rainy afternoon. So we let it dry out for a day, and we're back out here. Of course, it's cold again. And we got our new rebuilt starter. It's a rebuilt Ducko Remy unit, and we're just going to throw it back in the same way. Now, I did mention earlier in the video about shims and shimming the starter. When we pulled the original starter out, or what was in there out, there was no shim. So we're going to put this one back in with no shim and see how it sounds. You just missed a lot of cursing. So I'm under there, go to put the starter in, and the bolts won't go through the starter housing, because the starter housing is too small. So I get a drill them out. Now the bolts go through. So I get the bolts in, the starter's mounted up, I go to make my wiring connection, and as soon as I go to tighten down the positive terminal to the starter, the whole solenoid just cracks in half, and the whole thing just falls apart. Just crap rebuilt shit out there. And I went to a good mom and pop auto parts store so that I would get a quality rebuilt thing, not some crap off the shelf at a big box store. And what does it get me? Pulling it back out, back to the parts store. Alright, so after taking the defective starter back to the parts store and having them break my balls, because would you tighten it with a breaker bar, blah blah blah, you know, they had to break my balls, even though they understood that sometimes there are defective starters, and probably was a crack in the plastic solenoid, and as soon as I went to tighten it down, the whole thing just fell apart. Starters do have a tag on them. Don't tighten them more than 8 foot-pounds. Will not warranty if it's broken or whatever, but sometimes you do get a defective one. Sometimes that's the benefit of going to a mom and pop place, because they understand that, where at a big box place it says it on the thing. If that breaks in that spot, no warranty. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts, because they don't understand that, you know, the starter could have been dropped. There could have been a crack in that plastic housing for the solenoid. So anyway, I get the starter, and now I gotta wait a week because the weather's shitty. We had, you know, sleet, snow, rain, everything, and I wake up Saturday morning and we got a nice mild Saturday. Dry and mild. And I get the starter out, I go under the car, and the skies open up, and now it's pouring, and my ass is soaking wet. Get the starter in, no shims. Those straight shims, by the way, will only work in the angle plug starters if you bend off the tab, the thumb tab that you use to slide it in. You got to bend that down in order to get it. You can get it to work. You're better off if you buy the Z-shape or the L-shaped shims. They make the job much easier. If you remember, when we took the starter out, there was no shim, so we put it back in with no shim. We routed our wires nice to make sure they were away from the exhaust, because the exhaust is right there, and you want to route those wires away from that, because you don't want those wires to get heat soaked from the exhaust, and you have a little trouble starting after a hot start, because you're getting those wires are just so hot. So anyway, put the starter in, hook the battery back up, and I'll show you how it sounds. Sounds good with no shims, so we're going to leave it with no shims. I'll show you. Starts right up, sounds good. No clanging anymore because that gear isn't bouncing off the flywheel, and that's it. So another phase of our mild redo of the Big Dummies K5 Blazer is done. Now I get to drive it around for a couple days, see how it feels, and then we're going to start tearing into some brakes and suspension work and stuff like that. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, don't forget, give us that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, check out our new channel, Axel's Kitchen, and as always, thanks for watching.